So there we go. Okay. So how you guys doing?
We're doing great, or I'm doing great.
That's okay. I'm happy to be included.
Oh, nice, man. What's your guys' names again?
It's Paul.
I'm Michael.
Paul and Michael. Okay, good. Paul and Michael. Hey, babe, I'm on a Buddhist call. Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right.
No, it's not okay.
She's like, no, get up.
Everything is always okay unless the wife says it's not.
Yeah. Yes.
That's
Absolutely.
that's the Dhamma of the householder.
Yeah. I always have a habit of talking about the distinctions between householders and monks. Are you guys familiar with Buddhadasa Bhikkhu?
Yes.
Somewhat, yeah.
That's how I discovered Dhammarato. I was a Buddhadasa Bhikkhu fan, and I discovered, it was mentioned that he was a monk, who was with Buddhadasa Bhikkhu, and I was like, oh, somebody who knows Buddhadasa Bhikkhu, and then that's how I kind of came to him through that interest. Yeah.
That's awesome, man.
Mm-hmm.
There's a great book from Buddhadasa Bhikkhu. It's called The Truth of Nature.
Mm-hmm.
And it's last time I saw it on Amazon, it was fairly expensive because I think they're running out of copies of it. It's been out for so long. But it's a great book because it's a bunch of lay people, so to speak, basically who just asked. It's in a question and answer format, so it's wonderful. You could skim through the index, and it just shows all the stuff that people are asking.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very important questions and relevant questions. And it's usually when you read a book by somebody who you admire in the Dhamma, you have to wait for the juicy stuff to kind of come and discover it for yourself. But in this book, it's so nice to skim through because you can be like, oh, I wonder what Buddhadasa Bhikkhu would say on death. I wonder what he would say on monks. I wonder what he would say on this, on that. And but anyways, what he said about monks, and somebody asked him, can lay people become enlightened just like monks? Is there better or worse? Is it better to be a monk? Is it worse? And he's like, his answer was, whether in order to become enlightened, you have to surpass both a layman, a householder, and a monk. He's like, these are just conceptual notions, basically, is what I got that he was saying, that no matter what you're doing in life, you have to get past those labels, those preconceived notions, those judgments, those conceptions, and see them for what they are. Anicca, dukkha, anatta. Impermanent, if we cling to them, causes dukkha, suffering, and no permanent self, no permanent soul or self, which is really what they're saying is the ego, in my opinion. The I, me, my, mind. Go ahead, bud. Were you going to say something?
Well, I mean, it's kind of just, like Buddhadasa Bhikkhu, he spoke about non-self and emptiness a lot throughout his life, but in the 90s, I would say he started to develop sort of a concession in the way he spoke about self, and he started talking about a self that is not self. Yeah. And I think a modern way of understanding what he's talking about is that the Buddha was one of the first people to the notion of the self in ancient India, if we're going to call it that. I know that it wasn't India at the time, but was like something that is permanent and static and unchanging. And so by saying that, all these things that we take together as a constellation, in the same way that we look at a constellation and, we project our culture onto it. So we see one culture sees a bear, another person sees a man shooting an arrow when they look at a constellation of stars. we look at the constellation of the aggregates, and we tie them together with our perception, and then we take that to be this unchanged entity, or that maybe that those things together are this unchanging entity called a self, or the self is separate from those things, or the self is inside of those things, or the self is sort of like the substrate of those things. He was saying, the Buddha was saying essentially that none of those, just it's the constellation of processes that if you understand them as conditioned arising just as they are, that you can't really see self in them, apart from them, or among them, or behind them, that you can't really assign a sense of self anywhere in the aggregate. But in our modern understanding of self, even if you look at like the history of modern psychology, the psychology, the word psyche meant soul. And as
oh, really? That's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, from psychology started by trying to study something called the soul. And as
that is such a cool fact.
They kept looking at the mind. They couldn't find something that was static and unchanging there. So then they kind of abandoned this idea of a soul and started studying more so human behavior. And our modern understanding of self is something that is constructed and dynamic. But we don't experience it that way. We don't perceive it that way. We experience it as something that's sort of like always been there. So when Buddhadasa says like a self that is not self, he's acknowledging that fact that this feeling I, me, and mine that's always arising is something that is dynamic, that we gather together from these different thinking and perception. And when you understand it that way, then you are abandoning the notion of self, not necessarily uprooting the feeling of taking these things personally. That's sort of another level of it. But you gain a certain level of freedom when you don't have a fixed idea of who and what you are, which is
that's right.
That's
exactly right.
But you can identify as a monk and have a certain image of a monk and who you are as a monk, or you can identify as a lay person and have a certain image of who you are and whatnot. But it's really about abandoning all identification and just having like a sort of non-identification relationship. Right. That's kind of, I think, what Buddhadasa was talking about.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. In another one of his books, The Heartwood of the Bodhi Tree, the whole book is kind of about anatta and also about what they call in English the void. I'm not really sure what they call it in Thai or Pali. But the point of the book, from what I gathered from reading it, I think I still have a few chapters left. But he was talking about how he mentioned that they used to call, when the Buddha would refer to anatta, it's often translated as no self, but back in the ancient times, in his time, it was like no soul. But Buddhadasa Bhikkhu went on to say that what they really were getting at was, it was like they didn't have like a word for the ego, so they use the soul. They use an obsession with this focus on a separate entity from nature, me, and recognizing that if one desires negatively, if one attaches negatively, it's always involved with the ego, aka soul, in their time. So that's kind of the gist that I got what he was saying. And he even went so far, highlighted a lot of beautiful passages from that book, but Buddhadasa Bhikkhu even went so far as to say utterly annihilate any sense of self whatsoever. And I thought that was wonderful. I love hearing stuff like that. I don't know why. It just makes me feel good.
Well, you replace the word self with I call it identification, personification, and possessiveness. You know,
Yeah.
And what's at the core of those three things is a sense of permanence. You know, we externally humans used to personify processes of nature like storms, you know, and so we think a storm was an angry god, which is assigning a self to a storm. But you know, we start to understand that storms are created by atmospheric pressure, you know, hot and cold, electricity, ions, negative and positive ions, all the conditions that give rise to a storm. We understand the conditioned arising of a storm. We no longer personify a storm. And if we can understand the conditioned arising of thinking, perception, sensation, memory, consciousness, we can understand the conditioned arising of these constellation processes, that we no longer personify this internal activity of nature either. So, you know, when the weather changes externally, it's okay. When the weather changes internally, it's okay, because it's never something that we see as static. Bhante Punjabi says, you know, that the notion of self, the notion of world, is a static concept in a dynamic reality, and that's what creates suffering. We conceptualize it as static, and then there's never changes. It's never static at all, ever, you know, and not even for a nanosecond.
Yeah, that's well said, man. Yeah. Something that's static and always dynamically changing thing. It's like Ajahn Chah would say, like, if you want a duck to be a chicken and a chicken to become a duck, you're going to spend a life of misery, because that's not the way things are. So if we want permanence, if we want a soul, if we want to be certain about the afterlife, be prepared to suffer, because nobody knows what's going to happen after we die. The only thing we do know is the truth of nature, the Dhamma, here and now, that things tend and seem, upon observation, to constantly be changing and in flux. This is the nature of reality, you know. And upon more observation, self-investigation, we see that the more selfish we become, it seems to be where all the evil in this world springs from. Like, what's that beautiful writer? Eric Hoffer said, if you want to know mankind, if you want to know the world, know yourself. And we can see upon observation and experimentation and investigation that, yeah, definitely, the more selfish I become, you may get some temporary sense pleasures here and there, but ultimately, we all know this, that it all leads to depression, anxiety, anger, hatred, delusion, ignorance, fear. Anybody with two brain cells can see that a selfish man is not necessarily happy. And you hear some people talk, especially now in this day and age in society with the social media, it's becoming really popular, kind of a new trend, unfortunately, to be an asshole, to be a rich, money-grubbing, getting all the women, what they call this alpha male asshole. And it's ironically the very people who are out there spouting this ridiculousness of what an alpha is and what is this. By the way, it's not beta, it's omega. They don't even realize what they're saying. Betas are actually high up in the status of what they're getting from wolf kind of packs. But anyways, all that stuff is not important, you know. And when we see these people online, they may say things like, oh, I don't need friends, I don't need happiness, I don't need this stuff. And to me, it's so obvious that it's just somebody who's really hurting, covering up this painful disease that they have of the mind by posturing with this peacocking, chest beating type of shit, you know. And it's all bullshit. It's all bullshit.
Yeah.
A real man.
Concept.
Go ahead, buddy.
Anytime you're holding on to a concept, you're going to suffer. Like, there's other teachings that are similar to the way that Dhammarato teaches the Dhamma. that are sort of geared at getting the mind to accept things as they are. And I've experimented with those teachings. Like there's like non-dual teachings where like, you know, you're already awareness, you know, and it leads the mind to kind of accept this present moment experience, but it also leads the mind to conceptualize awareness. So then you have this concept of awareness that becomes like an entity in your mind, because an entity is a concept. It's, you know, that's just another word for a concept. That whole static concept of a dynamic reality, any concept you create gives the illusion of permanence. And so if you go with the non-dual teachings, even if they're true, let's say, even if it's true that consciousness is fundamental and awareness is unchanging, the second you let yourself give into that, which I did for a very short period of time, you have this now static concept that you have to defend, that there's this fundamental thing, and you have to hold on to it. You have to keep reminding yourself about it. But the Buddha, instead of focusing on like, okay, here's the one place where you can find something that endures, and he instead focuses our attention on what makes the problems in the first place, which is craving. It's wanting things to be the things that you like to remain. It's wanting the things that you don't, that are unpleasant, to go away. It's wanting to change the way that things are. It's wanting the concepts that you have of the world to be true in an absolute sense. Like, so he just focuses on abandon all of that, and then what is what is. It just remains, but not as a concept, just as what it is. And that's the only way to kind of have like a mind that doesn't suffer, because you're not trying to hold on to anything. You're not trying to create anything. And Ajahn Chah, once again, says it in the best way. He calls, you know, nibbana just realizing the reality of non-grasping. Once that craving and that grasping ceases, then things just carry on as they are without making problems out of them, you know?
Yeah.
There's a video of me arguing with Dhammarato when I was going through this little non-dual phase. And, you know, I go back and look at it and I agree with Dhammarato because I had this early experience of awakening. And at the time I was 15, and I conceptualized that experience as ultimate reality. And so every time I went down a spiritual path, even with Buddhism, I was always trying to make it fit into this idea of ultimate reality. And when I was talking about ultimate reality, I was just talking about this experience free of craving. But because I was calling it that, I was creating a concept in my mind that I then had to hold on to, I then had to defend.
Right.
And anytime I spoke it to somebody, they weren't hearing me saying things are okay just as they are. They're hearing me saying like there's this something that endures, right? And it wasn't until I was able to kind of give up that concept even that I wasn't suffering anymore trying to defend it. Because whatever concept you create, you have to hold it, you have to defend it, you have to keep feeding it stories and narratives, and that's just a lot of effort. I compare it to a buzz, you know, like Dhammarato talks about like wanting things that are freely available as being wisdom. Like sometimes, you know, having a couple of beers, that's, you know, you can experience non-suffering because you put all your craving is just right there in drinking that beer. So you're not conceptualizing, you're not worrying about life and death, you're not worried about philosophy, you're not worried about Buddhism, nothing. You're just sitting there enjoying a beer. So you're not really craving in that moment because you have what you want. But you then have a buzz that you have to maintain, because you know when the buzz goes away, you're going to feel lethargic, you're going to feel tired, you're going to feel kind of shitty. So you got to maintain the buzz. So now you're giving yourself something that you have to care for, you know? And it's in a short time period, but ultimately it's unsatisfying, because though the buzz might feel good, it's going to degrade, it's going to fade away, then you're going to get tired and you're going to get moody.
Hey, Michael,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but I do have a question for you. It's like when you were saying that there's nothing, you were saying like when you had your awakening, you had that sense that this non-dual state was something that was always there, and it was not undergoing change. And so if I were to now interpret that as to say that emptiness never changes, wouldn't you say that that could be said when you said that your error, as you described it, was that nothing is permanent, but if it's not a thing, can it then not be permanent?
Well, yeah, I mean, emptiness, if you understand the reason that the Buddha, well, I mean, emptiness in early Buddhism and emptiness in like the Mahayana tradition kind of are different, but emptiness is sort of a negation of all concepts. It's not a thing. A thing, like Alan Watts says, a thing is a think. So essentially, whatever object, there's if you look at it, the world, if you look at nature, there's actually no objects in nature. The process of perception objectifies nature, right? Like if you look at the Mississippi River, right, there's no actual Mississippi River there. It's a form and a name that's part of a larger process we call the water cycle. At no moment in time is there ever such a thing as a Mississippi River. The Mississippi River only ever exists as a name and a form that's in a state of constant change, right? So the Mississippi River is a concept in the mind of people who call it the Mississippi River. So that's that static concept that we project onto the dynamic reality that is the water cycle.
I understand that nothing in the phenomenal world, like Nisargadatta once said, anything that you can perceive doesn't have permanence or doesn't have existence, or anything that you can perceive doesn't exist fundamentally. So I get that. But in terms of saying like, grounding oneself, and I know that this is kind of my personality or ego grasping at trying to ground itself in something. But if we say that space in which everything arises, or the emptiness that makes room for everything that arises, comes and goes, that is always there, or no?
I'm not sure if he's there. Can you hear us, Michael?
Even your take, Dhammadas.
What was your question again?
The question was like when we said that nothing endures or nothing is, in that sense permanent, then we do only refer to phenomena and we only refer to perceptions.
I guess my answer would be careful not to over intellectualize the Dhamma or anicca, dukkha, anatta, which is very easy thing. It's a very easy thing to do. Is he okay? Yeah. Because we could kind of get caught up in the seaweeds of things like impermanence, no self, no soul, ego, all that stuff. But really, it's about gladdening the mind here and now. I don't know all the answers to the technical questions, and they're not really important. Like Dhammarato always says, we don't need to get these things right. We just need to get them happily. And part of a lot of dukkha that's created, because if we're in the Dhamma, we're natural philosophers by heart. I know I am. I'm sure you guys are as well. But that could sometimes be a hindrance, and we miss seeing the subtle nature of what this is, which is a practice. And the practice is of turning dukkha into sukha, joy. And that's the only thing the Buddha was interested in. Sure, we can talk about all the other things and get really in depth, but at the end of the day, it's kind of just pissing in the wind, unless.
I hear you there. That's not a good proposition that you're making there about pissing in the wind, because it just splashes right back on you. It's not pleasant, But in that sense, you get defiled, and that there's the pollution. But what I'm asking you, what I'm asking is like, is there something that you in your practice rely on?
Anapanasati, the Noble Eightfold Path.
So we do say that is something to rely on, right?
Oh, definitely.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. Because when we say
it's
like,
the only thing in this whole life to rely on.
Yeah. If I say like, well, nothing is permanent, therefore I can't rely on anything.
Oh, no. It's when we talk about impermanence, we're only talking about impermanence in regards to not suffering. We're not trying to figure out the answers to all the questions in the world. We're only trying to discover some sense of joy, happiness, peace right here, right now, away from these conceptual notions, even a lot of the conceptual notions that have to deal with the Dhamma, you know.
Yes,
Because
and I've been very surprised since I've been following Dhammarato's teachings, or rather, the original sutta teachings. I've been very surprised that I in fact did have that ability to dukkha dukkha nirodha, where initially I was always thinking like, well, that's just deceiving. I'm deceiving myself by pretending like the other stuff isn't there. And I came from Zen, and in Zen, my teacher very much emphasized always the application of the three poisons to avoid the three poisons, passion, aggression, ignorance. And so it's like when something arises in the mind stream, don't accept it, don't reject it, and don't ignore it. But the thing is that I am now rejecting the propositions that the constructed self makes that lead to suffering. And I'm actually able to do that. But this is a big departure from what I've been trained for so many years, because he said, don't reject, But now I am rejecting the content that does seem to lead to suffering. And I feel great, obviously.
Well, yeah, well, that's kind of the change, actually, is when they say don't accept. What they're really, or I'm sorry, what were they saying? Don't
accept. Don't accept, don't reject, don't ignore.
And what ironically, what that really, in my interpretation, is talking about acceptance, compassion, not judging. And when we do those,
not judging for sure, yeah.
Yeah, and when we do those things, it may seem passive, like Ajahn Chah used to say, just gently resting in the way things are. It may seem like a passive kind of woo-woo thing, but actually, that's the change that we're doing, is the letting go, is the gently accepting things as they are. We don't have to like things as they are. We don't have to dislike them. But there is a level of acceptance that this is the way things are. It's okay. And that is the holy alchemy change. That is in itself the Eightfold Noble Path. When something is causing dissatisfaction in our mind, we're having thoughts, feelings, and emotions in wholesome, nurturing ways. And we're building these good habits, these good karmas, these good sankharas.
I mean, I can feel how good it feels. I can see how good it feels, and I'm really enjoying it, and I'm going to keep doing it. So there's no doubt about that. But I just wanted to point out what my old teacher used to say. He used to say that by accepting something, I'm subtly reinforcing the concept of an ego, because as I accept this, or I accept this and I reject that,
It's almost my first feeling I get when you say that is like it's a bit over intellectualizing it, which is fine. It's fun. It's a fun game to over intellectualize sometimes.
Not for me. Not for me anymore, believe me.
No. Well, don't take it too seriously. There's nobody with a gun to your head saying, hey, your old master said this, you should do this. Remember what he said this. Your master probably was a loving guide. So don't, I think he would want you to be happy more than worrying about if you're doing it right according to his rules and regulations. You know what I mean?
I don't think he wanted. I think happy. I think happy is like another, thing to get attached to, in his opinion. So,
if that is causing you dissatisfaction, then an attachment to happiness can lead to dukkha. But it's kind of again over intellectualizing the word happiness. It's just peace. It's just happiness. It's not an over imbalanced abundance of chasing happiness. It's not an addiction that's causing dukkha. We're saying happiness in a balanced way. We're saying joy what is a balanced way? What's the difference between a good attachment and a bad attachment? A good attachment brings sukha, brings joy, brings peace, equanimity. A bad attachment brings dukkha, dissatisfaction. So,
I like this. I like this very much because we can't help as people. We can't help being attached. So then might as well discriminate between good and bad attachments. I like that notion of good and bad attachment. Yeah. Good one.
Desire is not the problem. like Ajahn Sumedho said, it's attachment to the desire that's the problem. It's the attachment to either wanting or not wanting things to be, wanting things to be different than they are, wanting things that we can't have. That is the very, fountainhead of where all this dukkha is coming from. Hi, buddy. Welcome back. I don't know if you can hear us. You were talking earlier, and then it kind of just abruptly ended.
Welcome back.
Yeah, my iPhone overheated for some reason, and
that's been happening a lot lately.
The battery is going down very.
Yeah, it's hot out
there. I did have it kind of resting on my steering wheel, and it's sunny. The sun was hitting it through the windshield, but also the battery is decreasing quickly, so I'm not sure how much longer I'll be on the call, but
all good.
Yeah, I'm not sure where you guys are at in the conversation, so
I don't know
that
anywhere.
Paul was saying something about emptiness.
Never mind.
Always being there.
Yeah, something like that. Never mind, though. I mean,
but reality is always here. Like reality is always unfolding constantly. There's this concept in early Taoism, like 6th century BCE Taoism, called Zhujian, which is it's the way that they conceive of nature, which they call it the spontaneous, constant unfolding. They view the cosmos as like this spontaneously self-generating organism in a way. That's a way of conceiving it, but there's no concept of like past or future. It's presently unfolding constantly. It's sort of like I almost picture it like a fire. It's arising and disbanding rapidly. And that's how they conceive of all of nature, whether external or internal. So its nature is change, and any name or form you give to nature is a concept that the process of perception creates. And when you understand concepts as concepts, then you can sort of like abandon any grasping and clinging at something you like or dislike. Like Dhammadasa was just saying, although I would modify it just very slightly, like it's not agreeable or disagreeable feeling that's the problem. It's the craving and clinging to agreeable or disagreeable. When something is agreeable, good. It's it's pleasant. Let it come and go. When something is disagreeable or unpleasant, okay, let it come and go. So agreeable and disagreeable or pleasant, unpleasant will continuously arise and pass because, the body itself has its preferences, and, it's without sort of grabbing onto one thing or the other, you're not going to create suffering. It's funny if you go back and watch all the videos of everybody who talked to Dhammarato. Sometimes somebody will say something, you're like, oh yeah, that's a good point. But the second you think, oh, that's a good point, that's grasping and clinging, because then you watch another video and there's somebody with a different point, and then you watch videos of yourself in the past and then you had all these points. And like, if you don't just stick to the fundamental like principle of like everything is already okay exactly as it is, then there's always going to be a what if or a what about or a but that the mind creates as something important to hold on to. And it's really just a commitment to abandoning all of those what ifs, all of those what abouts, all of those buts, and just accepting the things as they are. And then that's the cessation of craving and clinging, which is what the Buddha is telling us to do in the Four Noble Truths. He's just saying abandon a craving and clinging. And then dukkha, the self, the world, and the dukkha that depends on that craving and clinging won't arise from it. So that's kind of a radical focus on the Four Noble Truths right there, I think.
There's a lot of teachers who are always contradicting themselves. Some of my favorite teachers, and some bad ones do it too, so it can be confusing for the students. But for the good teachers, you'll often hear them contradict themselves. And it's because they're not giving you Christian Bible rule 10 commandment things. They're giving you guidelines. They're giving you joy. They're not concerned with the intellectual side of it. They're not concerned with being right. That's what a lot of beginners in the Dhamma don't understand. That's what I didn't understand for a long time. I was so concerned with getting it right. Maybe I could be the only one who gets it perfect, like the Buddha. And the fact that I wanted that was exactly what was prohibiting me from experiencing the joy and bliss that exists right now. Is that maybe I can get it right. It's the old Western mindset of maybe I can be the best. Maybe I could be the one. Maybe I, me, my, running the race, doing all these things. And then it dawned on me like, oh wait, I'm literally perfect just the way I am, and not in an egotistical selfish sense, like everything's okay sense, in a selfless way, and getting rid of the ego and just being like, oh, it's just a conceptual tool that can be a help if I use it wisely. And it could be a hindrance. Like everything in life is a tool. It's a hammer. You can use it to build a house or knock somebody in the head. Depends on how you use it. The hammer itself is not necessarily bad. And like a lot of addicts, they're addicted to heroin these days, fentanyl. It's not the drug that's bad. It's not the drug that's the problem. It's their addiction to the drug. And hospitals, they've used fentanyl forever to help people in many different ways.
Oh, it's used in labor.
So then I want to ask you a question. I want to ask you guys a question, which is the whole idea of choicelessness that was very emphasized by my previous teacher. And I understand, Michael, what you were saying, that reality is always reality. So basically, we don't have a choice in the matter. We could either oppose it or not oppose it. That's where we have the choice. And I do feel, and so I do feel that we are working very much with choice. So what is your guys' understanding of that term, or do you think it's just basically a misinterpreted term, choicelessness? Because I'm enjoying choosing dukkha nirodha. I mean, I'm enjoying choosing dukkha nirodha, and I want to keep doing that. But before I was told, no, don't choose, So.
Well, it's sort of like it's sort of a conceptual trap in a way because until craving is completely uprooted, which none of us are in that boat, even maybe some of us have abandoned even the goal of that, like, okay, picture a tree. You're watching a tree grow through a time-lapse photography over the course of its entire life. If you could imagine that at some point the tree developed a concept of this is me and I want to be this way, like while it's like maybe a 10-year-old tree, and then when it becomes a 30-year-old tree, it's nostalgic for when it was a 10-year-old tree. It's if a tree could create a static concept of at what point was it that it was exactly who it should be, or maybe sometime in the future it's exactly who it should be, but it's always already what it is. It's always already this dynamic process of nature that's constantly unfolding. And sort of in my opinion, is that the arising of right view in the Dhamma is when you understand that fact that everything is already it's already what it is, and it's just the abandoning of concepts about what point in time or place or form that it should be or shouldn't be that creates the dukkha. That's what the Buddha is talking about when he talks about the 5 aggregates afflicted by clinging. A tree with a concept of me and mine, or this is what I should be, would be the aggregates of that tree afflicted by clinging. Trees, to my knowledge, don't do that, but we do. So it's that conceptualizing. So choiceless awareness is maybe an effort to get rid of that, but we as human beings have this reflexive capacity, this metacognition we call it, and so the only choice we have is really within that realm of metacognition, which is we can choose to have the attitude of acknowledging that we always already are just this unfolding process of nature, and there's no point of perfection that we need to get to or that we were. We always already are just this unfolding process of nature. Just view yourself through a time-lapse lens. Imagine your whole life through a time-lapse lens, and there's just these bubbles of clinging arising and passing throughout your whole life of, oh, I was this, or I should be that, or I shouldn't be that, and you're just creating suffering. It's just bubbles of suffering. That's why the Buddha sometimes says, like, whatever arising is just suffering arising, because every concept is just a static concept in a dynamic change in reality. So choiceless awareness is an effort, I think, to abandon all of these concepts, but it's a bit of a conundrum because you have to kind of choose to have that right attitude in order to settle the mind down to a point of non-grasping that might be that choiceless awareness they're talking about. So it's tricky, you know what I mean? I think that thinking of it as starting and continuing with being satisfied with things as they are is a better way of getting to that. You're making a choice there, right? So that might be a better way of getting to that choiceless awareness, whereas choiceless awareness itself might just be a concept that's an effort to kind of like conceive of non-self or of emptiness. But it's just another bubble that the mind is creating when you're coming at it from a place of like heavy selfing already, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's like a concept. Choiceless awareness is another concept also. So, in some ways, one could get attached to that as well. So, and I feel like what we've been doing here, or what is like the ego's nature, or like I'm going to call it ego. The ego's nature is to want to create difficulty so that it can have a purpose, trying to solve the difficulty and whatever. And so when I'm choosing not to see a problem, that in a way is taking that choice away from the ego. So maybe that's a way for me anyway, to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, the Buddhist teaching has karma and the ending of karma, or karma and the ending of karma, and karma is choice, right? So while you're in the fictions, there's karma, there's choice. But the karma that ends to karma is the karma that leads to the ending of karma, or the choice that leads to the ending of choice, is the choice to accept things as they are. And if you continuously accept things as they are, and not creating these static concepts that are, that is exactly what grasping and clinging is, that leads to the ending of grasping and clinging. And then at a certain point, no choice needs to be made. But, so, I mean, I don't know. I mean, they may be right. I can't say, but it's just another thing that can be conceptualized, I think.
Especially if there's no right and wrong.
Thought, I guess you could say.
It reminds me of that old Zen saying, let go of everything, even letting go. Let go even of letting go. So it means like that's a kind of koan type of way of saying like chill out, everything's okay.
Yeah.
Because who lets go, I mean, who would be letting go?
When we're satisfied, where is this self? When we're satisfied, where are the guides, even the rules? When we're satisfied, that's where what I love Bodhidharma used to say, that's our true nature. I love the concept of a true nature. And it kind of reminds me of the Advaita Vedanta saying the Atman, or true self, as opposed to the false ego self. And that coincides well with Theravada and Zen. And that's why Buddhadasa Bhikkhu, I think, liked Zen a lot too, because it's all saying the same thing in different words. Even Jesus in Christianity, if you really pay attention to what he was saying, he didn't talk about Sunday school. He didn't talk about sitting on golden thrones in the Catholic Church and treating children horribly. He talked about loving your neighbor, and the kingdom of heaven is within you. And that's what John the Baptist talked about too. And they lived simple, beautiful lives, and they loved everybody. And
if you think about what you're saying, Dhammadas, is saying the similar thing, that it's almost like because each of these sages, like John the Baptist, Jesus, the Buddha, Dhammarato, in our context here, they're saying the things that you're searching for, they're all telling them the same thing. The thing that you're searching for, Nibbana, the kingdom of heaven, it's already here, right? It's the same message. So whatever you're searching for is a concept that your mind has made up, and that's creating your dissatisfaction. So if you're being told heaven's already here, Nibbana's already here, enlightenment's already here, you're already okay exactly as you are, that's just bringing about the extinction of wanting things that you don't have, which is what craving is, right? And so they're all just trying to convince us to stop wanting things that we don't have, because it's just like the disease that we have, right? of wanting things to be different, wanting things that we don't have, wanting a
Avidya,
job to do.
ignorance.
Yeah, and you know, in my own experience, hearing that used to offend me. There's a conversation I had with Dhammarato where like this, I said like this idea that things are okay already as they are is like a cancer patient being okay with having cancer, not getting treatment. But really, that's just the mind resists hearing that because if you're a spiritual person, you've had your whole life of thinking there's this big, amazing explosion that you're working your way towards getting. And when somebody tells you like, no, there's nothing at the end of the rainbow. Everything is okay exactly as it is. Your mind resists that. It doesn't want to accept that. It doesn't want, because your mind's not ready to be satisfied. That's the only reason that it's hard to accept, because the mind is not ready to stop chasing after things.
Hold on.
And you know, when the mind accepts that there's nothing to get and it stops chasing things, you're still going to have to endure the old habits that you've had your whole life for a while. And you're just going to have to continue being okay with those old habits arising and passing. But they start to degrade very quickly. You know, all those unwholesome states, they start to arise less and less and less. You no longer take them personally. And then eventually this idea that everything is okay starts to become like very clear. You know, it becomes like, oh, that really is the reality. Like everything actually is okay exactly as it is. And you just actually do become satisfied. It's almost like you have to at first convince yourself of it. And then very quickly after you become convinced of it, it becomes true, not as a delusion, but as a reality. Because like I said, if a tree was creating an idea of something it needed to be, but it's always already just this unfolding process of nature. It already is what it is. It would just need to let go of that concept to be what it already is. And that's the same with us. We're no different, you know. We're just these unfolding processes of nature. You know, we create self, we create concepts in the same way apple trees create apples and grass creates, you know, germs and seeds and whatnot. And you just stop taking it personally. You see it all as just nature doing its thing, and you just accept it and abide happily with it, you know.
Totally.
I don't know. I tend to over explain it. I enjoy watching your videos actually, Dhammadasa. I'm intruding now because you have a very simple way of putting it.
Oh no, I love people like you who are very good at explaining these things in very interesting technical ways, because it reminds me of, and maybe I do it sometimes in more simple ways, but it's okay because they're both good. Because I'll listen to Ajahn Sumedho talk. You know, a Dhamma talk could go 3-4 hours sometimes. So we're all just really getting together in the Sangha and saying don't worry, be happy in so many different ways and words. And the whole Pali Canon is don't worry, be happy, really. It's all dukkha, dukkha, nirodha. So any way you want to go about expressing these beautiful things, it's all perfect. It's all good. Even some people who come on here and they want to debate or they want to argue or they want to think they have the right way. I love that too. Not that you guys are doing that, but I'm just saying if that happens, that's good too, because that's how we all learn.
Yeah.
So that's why the Sangha is so awesome. It's like it's a place where you can go and express the Dhamma, how you would like in your own unique way. And there's no right or wrong answers, really, unless you really are ignorant. Then there's some pretty wrong answers. But yeah, generally speaking, it's a beautiful place of just chilling out and acceptance and peace and love, you know.
Yeah, speaking of which, I have a question. Is there any sort of sutta translations that you guys recommend? Because, you know, obviously there's such a vast array of them. And, you know, of course, I like the way you guys are putting it, the way Dhammadasa puts it and all of this. But, you know, when you read the suttas, it can be very dry and very technical and repetitive sometimes. Yeah. Is there somebody who did a better job where it's more readable?
Well, you know, that's why I really enjoy listening to Dhammarato talk, listening to people like DJ talk and other people in the Sangha, and especially reading Buddhadasa Bhikkhu, because you're right. When we read the Pali Canon, we're talking what, 3,000 years of translations of different languages, different cultures, different things. But we don't have. I love the Pali Canon. I recommend everybody read all the Pali Canon translations you can. But we have in our lifetime Buddhadasa Bhikkhu. We have Dhammarato. We have these books, these people, each other. We have the book between our own ears. So the Pali Canon's great. I'm not too familiar with. I have some Pali Canon in my house. I don't even know which branch or part it is of it, but maybe Michael would know more of the technical aspects of.
Yeah, well, I would say that there's 17,500 discourses in the Pali Canon, and they all have a audience, a context, and a purpose to them, just like we learned in AP language or whatever when we were in high school. And the Buddha used the language and the understanding of his audience to explain dukkha, dukkha, nirodha, just like Dhammadasa is saying. But for those of us who like it who are in a modern period, we have this long history of people like who you just mentioned explaining it to us, and we have the Buddha's life, which makes it pretty clear what he's really getting at. But if you like the stuff that gets right to the point, I love the Sutta Nipata. It gets really right to the point. There's almost every verse in the Sutta Nipata is just like it's down to like non-grasping, letting go of all views and concepts. And for me, like I don't know, maybe just with my experience, I don't know how anybody can read the Rohitassa Sutta and not understand exactly what the Buddha is saying there. He's saying essentially, there's this yogi who comes to him who's like, oh, I can leave my body and I can travel at the speed of a bullet, basically, or the speed of light. And I've been searching for the end of the world and I haven't found it, even though I can move super fast like this. And the Buddha is like, you do have to reach the end of the world to reach the end of suffering. But I say that the world is within this fathom-long body with its senses and its cognition. And, so he's basically saying right then and there that the entire cosmos, including all the cosmology of Hinduism that the Buddha conceded and spoke about, but, I think it's just because it was part of his culture, but he's saying it's all manufactured by the mind, essentially, and you have to come to the end of the world, the end of this this representation of reality that we create in our process of perception in order to come to the end of suffering. You have to come to reality as it is. He says it right there in the Rohitassa Sutta. So, if you're looking for something that gets you right there, I think that's a really good sutta. It's called the Rohitassa Sutta. I don't remember which one it is, the number, but and then like I said, the Sutta Nipata, the chapter of eights in Sutta Central, they translate it as the chapter of eights, and then the Tanisara Bhikkhu translates it as the chapter of octets or whatever, but it's like the fourth or fifth book and chapter in the Sutta Nipata. It's different than the rest of the Pali Canon. It just has a completely different style and tone, and it skips all of the cosmology that you see that people get really hung up on with rebirth and stuff like that. And then the Bhikkhuni verses. If you read the Bhikkhuni verses, those are really beautiful. So these poems by ancient Bhikkhunis that are just completely right to the point. They're like poems of their experience of stream entry or their experience of arahatship, but they're just they're more like Mahayana texts in that way, where they're very poetic and they're very just about the cessation of craving, not about rebirth and samsara being beginningless and the path being this long process of manly striving that's all over the canon. So yeah, anyway, that's the kind of stuff that I tend to go for now. I understand the purpose of all this stuff, and at least in my view, discussions with fundamentalists about the Pali Canon, they get annoyed with me, but I think that they each have their purpose and they each appeal to a different type of audience. But really, it does, like Dhammarato said, it all just comes down to Dukkha Dukkha Nirodha. Every student does.
Very cool. Very cool. I look forward to it.
It's kind of hard to find
sutra
some.
Really is a hard sutra. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying it's kind of hard. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people would disagree with me, but in my opinion, it's kind of hard to find some bad translations. I've never read a translation that was so out of its realm that it was leading to dukkha or leading somebody astray. I mean, outside of mundane view type stuff, and even that's gorgeous and beautiful and all part of the Dhamma anyway. But yeah, I haven't read really a book that was like hindering, something, or I think would hinder somebody. I mean, and even if it did, it's good that these things exist, because then we also don't take them too seriously or take it too religiously, because I was talking to DJ or somebody the other day, and I was saying, I just heard a video on YouTube from this guy's Brad, I forget his name, Brad something. He's a Zen master, for lack of a better word, and writer. And he said he had a student in his Zendo, and they were butting heads. They were not getting along, but he wasn't horrible. But the student stayed for many years, and he went on, and he always uses Brad's name and old Zendo as his branding, and he's like, wait a minute, I thought you hated me. And then he researched what the guy was actually teaching, and it was nothing like what the guy Brad was teaching. So there you have somebody who's a direct student from a teacher, and the teacher himself is not satisfied with what one of his main students was teaching other students. So you multiply that by 1,000, 3,000 years and cultures and languages, and it's amazing that any of us could pick up a book and get something out of it, to be honest.
It's what this book does with it,
Yeah, that's right. And we all feel it kind of intuitively. Why are we all into the Dhamma or Buddhism, or, it's all an amplifier of who we truly are anyway. You get an asshole and he becomes a Christian, he's going to be a Christian asshole. He's going to find anything in the Bible to justify his asshole nature. If you get an arrogant, know-it-all person, they're going to use the Pali Canon to justify their arrogance and whatever the fuck judgmental attitude.
That's right, I'm a noble.
That's right. When you're noble, it means you're joyful. You're happy with the way things are. You're okay. You're good enough is okay. So, yeah, that's beautiful, man.
So, Dhammarato, you're familiar with Buddhadasa's concept of atamayata?
What's that?
He became very focused on it near the end of his life. He called it the final word of Buddhism. He translates it as unconcoctability. I think Bhikkhu Bodhi translates it as non-identification. But basically, it's just a mind that can't be shaken, right? It's like an unshakable or imperturbable mind. What I like is this is how Dhammarato translates noble, right? He did that whole talk on noble gas and noble elements being gases and elements that can't be made impure. They don't rust, they don't mix, they have no odor. Noble gases have no odor. I made a joke about how arahats, when they fart, their gas is noble and odorless.
Not mine. Tell you that.
That's just the Dhammarato way of explaining atamayata. It's unconcoctable. It's not perturbable. It's a mind that has sort of fully accepted things as they are, so it has no craving or judgment in regard to them, and it just can't be concocted, and so what you're left is just what's here, and without overly interpreting enough to drive your car and do your job and whatnot, but not to develop a whole host of judgments about the world. And so yeah, like you said, noble is a mind that is joyful and and, able. That can't be. That's why confidence is a marker of stream entry. Because stream entry is the first sort of step into the noble Dhamma. If we're gonna use that framework of we don't usually necessarily use that framework here because people make all kinds of issues out of it. But when you become sort of confident in your ability to sort of know the Dhamma and to be imperturbable, that's when the mind has become noble. At least at the beginning. Like it's begun to become noble. So anyway,
I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
and your farts don't smell anymore. That's another
advantage. They smell like roses.
Yeah. Anyway.
That would be awesome. A surefire way to detect when we've become enlightened.
Yeah, it's like odorless gas.
No, but that's really good, man, because it's true. Because sometimes, that's why Dhammarato used to say too, if you want to, he would say, like, teaching, it's not something you want to go around being like, oh, I'm a teacher, but we're all teaching each other. But what Dhammarato was saying, when you become a teacher, when you talk about, and they even done studies in colleges and universities that scientifically back this up, when you are teaching somebody something, it actually helps you not only retain, but better understand what the hell you're even talking about. You know what I mean? Because oftentimes for many years, I've always talked about the Dhamma, and before that, Advaita Vedanta mixed with the Dhamma, and all these things for many, many years. And while doing that, it makes you contemplate, what the hell am I saying? Am I just repeating what this teacher's saying? Am I just repeating what this book is saying? And then you get to a place after, for me, many, many years where I'm like, I want to start talking about what I know, not what I'm regurgitating from somebody else. And yeah, I'll often quote here and there, but I'm quoting only the things that I completely resonate with from my own understanding. Otherwise, I'll just be bullshitting people, like I probably used to for many years. And it's not that it's necessarily a bad thing, but I was a young guy. I'm learning. We're all learning. But when you get confidence, it comes from a place of not being a tape recorder, not being a fax machine. You're saying something not because you're trying to impress, not because you're trying to gain status, not because you give a shit of what people think of you. You're saying it because it's the truth. You've practiced it. You feel that this is real. And the truth is, Dhammarato's right. Remember, look, and change. Gladdening the mind here and now. Don't worry, be happy. It's just the way it is. It's a practice that can make your life a beautiful, awesome, miraculous thing. And if you choose not to do it, it will lead you to despair. Not that you have to do it, but if you can also, hit your thumb with a hammer. It's your right to do so, but it's a foolish, ignorant errand to do that. So it's better just to be wise and just try to do the best you can and be a compassionate, joyful person. And that's as simple as it gets. And it comes, and if you really want to get as simple as it gets, silence. Go walk in nature. Go be by yourself. There's no politics in nature. There's no political sides arguing. There's no God in a sense that somebody judging you. There's not an ego even from your own point of view who's like worried about what this person's saying or how you can elevate this thing or this thing. When you're in nature in silence, you realize like, oh shit, I get it. I don't have to call myself a Buddhist. I don't have to call myself an atheist. I don't have to call myself a theist. I don't have to be right or wrong or black or white or up or down or being or becoming or birth and death. You're getting outside the cycle of samsara, outside the cycle of birth and death. And then what else is there to do but enjoy?
And to tie it again back to that framework of stream entry, we've all had that experience you're talking about, or most of us, I would say, many of us maybe, I don't know, but where, yeah, suddenly you're in nature and all the concepts fade, all the likes and dislikes, all of the political opinions, and you're like, oh, and, what happens is that the mind doesn't stay satisfied with that. The mind isn't satisfied with that knowledge in that moment. It feels ordinary. And then, it moves on proliferating, or then it remembers that experience and it creates a concept to lust after. And that's what the fetter of doubt is, that in those lower three fetters of identity, rites, rituals, doubt, that fetter of doubt is just not being satisfied with that knowledge that is right there in front of you, and then just a proliferation of questions that are endless and can't be answered. And the questions are like just another form that craving is searching for food. And the reason that they say confidence is a marker of stream entry is because you stop having questions. You just become satisfied with what you said, like with what you know. You don't have this need to regurgitate, all the things that you've heard. You don't have this need to convince anyone, or the reason that you're confident is because you don't have to look anywhere. It's all just right here in front of you, and you're satisfied with things as they are. And Buddhadasa called it just knowing what's what. That was kind of the way he explained it. Just knowing what's what. You just see things as they are, and you're satisfied with things as they are. And so there's no need to ask questions. There's no need to convince anyone. There's no need to convince yourself. There's no more knowledge that you need to gain. A tree doesn't need to read a book to turn sunlight into carbohydrates. There's nothing that we actually need to learn. We already are. We already have what we need.
And it's not a magical, out of this world. On one sense, it's not, but on one sense, it is. But what's awesome about the Dhamma is we're all on the equal playing field. We if you just don't care about being an arhat, don't care when you'll get enlightened, don't care about this, don't care about that, just care about gladdening the mind a little bit in a balanced way. And ironically, that's our true nature. That's what we're all Buddhas, we're all arahants. If we put down the weapons and stop fighting everything, if we're just like that one sutta the Buddha did, was it the flower sutta or something? I forget what it is, but the whole sutta, he's just silent and he just hands a flower to like Ananda or somebody. And there's some people in the Buddha's time talking about the Pali Canon. The Buddha didn't know what a Pali Canon was. The people around the Buddha didn't know that there would be a Pali Canon. They didn't know that there would be a tribe of monks that would have create what the Buddha said into a religion and take over the world and fight with each other and debate. They just saw a joyful God. And some people who met the Buddha on the road, it might have been a little girl carrying some fish to her father, and she happened upon the Buddha, and he might have just also handed her a beautiful little flower and a smile. She'll never read the Pali Canon, but when she's looking at that, when she has that experience with the Buddha, she's just experiencing the best teaching in all the history of humankind. She's one of the lucky ones who physically got to be with the Buddha and experience his teaching, and there wasn't a single word uttered. There was just an exchange of friendship, of peace, of joy. And that to her is her Pali Canon. She does, you know what I mean? And we're over here thinking, well, what about page 36? And what about this? It's like, that stuff doesn't matter. Because if you met the Buddha, he would just be a peaceful, joyful, chilled out dude who wasn't attached to too much concepts. And that's what we all are.
That's why my old master always used to say, don't teach.
Yeah, teach, don't teach,
That's right.
Whatever.
And he was very firm on that. But I'm a teacher. I've always been a teacher. I'm going to keep doing it. But
and some teachers will be tough on you and give you rules. It kind of sounds like your teacher. Some teachers will tell you, don't do this, do that perfectly. And what they're actually doing is they're subtly tricking you until you say, I've had enough of this teacher. I'm just gonna
Exactly,
do what I
exactly.
want.
That's exactly what happened. That's exactly what
You might come to
It's
them
like
with the
those
most,
training
with the
sequences.
most. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, the Buddha's path reminds me of those training sequences in the 80s and 90s movies where, like, the guy who's like maybe has some tragedies, like lost his family, he goes off on a journey and he finds this master in Asia, and the guy like makes him like carry water up and down hills and, you know, dig holes and, you know, scrub his feet and do all this horrible manual labor, this degrading stuff. And it's just like the whole purpose of it is just to get him to give up. You know, the giving up is the lesson.
Yes.
He could have just given up from the
Yes.
beginning, but he wouldn't. You know, he had this emotional trauma, and like that's what the Buddha is giving us. Like, you know, we're all chasing these material objects that we think that are going to make us happy. So he says, oh no, you know, that's not going to make you happy. Here's this big
Yeah.
amazing thing called nibbana. This is going to make you real happy. Trust me. And then you go chasing
Yeah.
after it, and after a certain point of striving and struggling, you realize there's nothing there. And then you give up,
Yeah.
and then the giving up is your nibbana. You know.
That's what I feel like Dhammarato does to me. I don't know if it's intentional or not intentional. I feel like it's intentional, but
I think it is.
sometimes I'll do a call and I feel like, oh, I figured out the perfect phrase, or I had the perfect call. I said the perfect things, and then I'll watch a Dhammarato video and be like, he'll like. Sometimes I'll feel like he'll take my exact phrases, and be like, oh yeah, don't use that, don't say that, don't do that, and I'm just like,
it's all wrong.
but then it gives me, then I'm like, and it's happened so much that I'm just like, okay, I could be okay with being wrong. And I could be okay with contradicting myself. And I could be okay with disagreeing with people who I admire.
Yeah,
I mean, that's so beautiful. That's why he's such a good teacher, you know?
Yeah. I honestly say I had my head up my ass my whole life. And I think Dhammarato is the first person who got me to take my head out of my ass. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
I don't, you know, for whatever reason, you know, maybe because his personality resembles my dad's personality or something, but, you know, like, I'm like, I've been winning debates my whole life, you know, and that's been like the craving that I've been unable to abandon. And the guy won't agree with you, you know? No matter what you say, he's going to contradict you. He's going to spin you around in circles. He won't, until you just give up whatever you're trying, whatever point you're trying, even if it's a really good point, you know. Although sometimes he does concede, you know, some things he'll be like, oh yeah, or he'll laugh because he likes the way you said it. But for the most part, he's just going to keep like disagreeing with you, and then, you know, kind of spinning you until you finally just give up the fight, you know. So
and it's also his, not just his way, but I think it's all kind of parents' way of letting you know, like, it's time for you to be an adult. You know, don't worry too much about what I'm saying. Take what I'm saying and use it as a guide. Sure, we're trying to help you, of course, but also there's a part where it's like, it's time to do your own thing. It's time to stand on your own 2 feet and think for yourself. Even though we love Buddhadasa Bhikkhu and we love the Buddha himself, they're just dudes, you know, and I'm sure they had a lot of flaws, but they weren't teaching you how to be a flawless person. They were teaching us how to be a joyful person, you know.
And also not to see myself as a person.
Yes.
You guys, I gotta go. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed myself.
I should probably get going too.
And I just want to point out that on my YouTube, it does say 12 Pacific time. So this was the time.
Well, it's always been, Wednesday, 1 o'clock Central Standard Time.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind.
I was an hour late today, so when I came on here, it was 2 p.m. And people get confused.
Pacific, then.
Yeah, because there were some time changes a while ago too, so that confused some stuff. But for me, in America, Central Standard Time, it's 1 p.m. So
are you a Midwesterner, Dhammarato?
Yes, and I forgot today because I was late, but I always go to the UK Sangha, US Sangha, and our Discord, and I always give a heads up. I didn't do it today because I forgot, but I usually do that. So no matter the time, usually you'll see me put up, hey guys, time in 30 minutes. So everybody's kind of prepared that way. So keep an eye out for that next Wednesday.
Okay, thank you.
Can I
Have a
share-
good one.
See ya.
You guys are
Bye.
awesome. Much peace and love.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye,
Bye.
guys.